What's up everyone, welcome back to another video. The FPL season for Premier League 2021-2022 is finally about to begin. We've had price reveals all day today on Sunday and we're going to go through them all. Players that I like the prices of, players that I think are overpriced and what this could mean for other players. So let's get straight into that video. So as I said, Fantasy Premier League have started to reveal the prices for the 2021-21 season. So we're going to go through all of the teams that they've got. They've started to post it today, which is Sunday. There'll be more out on Monday and we'll get into the detail of when I think the game is going to launch at the end of the video. But for now, let's start looking at each of those individual player prices that we have got so far. So the first team that we're going to have a look at is Arsenal, who dropped first this morning. Now, Aubameyang, a 10 million option, but has been moved back to a forward. So one less point for a goal and he won't get that clean sheet point as well. Now, the options that I really like here are actually in the midfield. So Smith Rowe at 5.5 million and Pepe at 7.5 million, with Gabriel there as a defender at 5 million. Now, if Odegaard doesn't get signed again by Arsenal and they don't replace that sort of attacking midfielder option, Smith Rowe at 5.5 could be really good value. And Pepe finished the season really strongly and I'm surprised that his price didn't get increased by more than it has. So just to see him at 7.5 I think is really good value, and I think there won't be many other players in that price bracket who will score more points than Pepe early on. So the fixtures for them aren't that easy, but we will get into that in another video. But I do like Pepe's price for this season at 7.5 million. So Arsenal overall, not a bad group of selections, but Aubameyang now as a forward, not one that I love. On to Brighton, and again, some really intriguing prices here. So we've got Sanchez, the goalkeeper, at 4.5, Gross at 6, Trossard at 6.5, Basuma at 4.5. So Sanchez, I think, is probably the best goalkeeper at 4.5 million that we will get. I will probably start the season with the Brighton goalkeeper Sanchez in net. I don't see anyone else that I'll go with. They've got a really nice run of fixtures. They were really good defensively last season, so I loved that at 4.5. I expected him to come in at 5. Trossard and Gross, Trossard particularly coming in at 6.5. There is rotation in that Brighton midfield and attack, but we know what he can do when he gets those starts. And at 6.5, I think there's a lot of potential for them there, especially when they have a nice fixture run. And Basuma at 4.5, he's probably going to be the go-to 4.5 midfielder. I don't see that many others being better than him. He's box-to-box midfielder. He has that goal potential as well as that assist potential, and with the clean sheets, you know, the occasional 3-pointer if you ever need him. And at just 4.5 million, there's not much we can really complain about that. So again, some really reasonable prices, but Sanchez in goal is definitely one that stood out for me there. Now into Crystal Palace, who then came up next. So Zaha is still a midfielder in at 7 million is okay. If he gets a big move, for example, to Arsenal, then at 7 million, I think he's a great option. I just think there are going to be better options playing for potentially more attacking teams for the likes of Pepe, for example, at Arsenal at 7.5, which I'd rather have in my team, but it may depend on who the new Crystal Palace manager is that comes in. That may depend on whether actually Zaha at 7 million, even at Crystal Palace, could be a good option. Now, Benteke, another attacker there, 6.5 million as a forward. It's probably 0.5 million more than I wanted to pay for Benteke. There are other options that we'll look to later on that I think are maybe a better option than Benteke, but it's not a bad price given how he ended the season. And then defensively, we have Gaeta in goal at 4.5 and Mitchell at 4.5. Mitchell at 4.5 is very expected. That's sort of what we thought he'd be. But Gaeta at 4.5, I see they tend to be doing this season with goalkeepers. They're making them quite affordable, which I quite like. It means that we're not all going to be jumping on the same keeper, although I think Sanchez is a great option. But Gaeta, I'm sure at some point we'll consider owning him, given that he's 4.5. A drop down from 5, given that Palace weren't that strong defensively last season. So again, some reasonable prices. No one that I'm really looking to start the season with, as their fixtures are quite difficult. But at times throughout the season, Mitchell, there's definitely potential for me to own him along with the others that have got there. The next up, which is Burnley, and this was slightly more disappointing than some of the other teams that we saw. So Pope came in at 5.5, and given that Sanchez and Gaeta are in at 4.5, I don't see there being much love for Pope, especially given that some of their defenders in Tarkowski and me with a bit more attacking threat. I know Pope has saves and things like that, but them coming in at 5 again makes Pope quite a difficult player to own. I'm hoping, but I think it's unlikely, that some of the wing backs, either Taylor or Peters in at left back could be 4.5. I don't think that's going to happen, but if they are, that's great. If not, 5 million for the Burnley defenders is probably a bit too much for me to own, but we'll see how someone else gets priced. And 7 million for Wood, again, feels like a little bit too much. He did finish the season very well, so I can see why they've done it. 7 million is probably a reasonable price. I'm probably a bit hopeful asking for him at 6.5 given the season that he had. Definitely worth considering, especially when they go on a nice run of fixtures. So defensively, I think it's a bit overpriced given how they performed last season, but at 7 million, Wood up front is definitely worth considering. However, next we go on to Leeds, and I think there are some really nice options in here. So Meslier at 5 is probably 0.5 more than I'd want to pay for him, again, given some of those 4.5 keeper options that we've already seen. But Cooper in at 4.5 in the defence is a really nice option. He's such a threat from corners. He could have had a couple of goals last season that he didn't convert. If he continues to play, I really like him as an option. And then 0.5 cheaper than Meslier. Ayling will probably be 4.5 or 5, and Dallas will now be a midfielder, so we'll have to find a different Leeds player to go with. Now Bamford in at 8, these forwards that do well, we saw it with Jimenez, we saw it with Ings last season, and they get that price hike and you start to wonder, I'm going to have to look elsewhere. We're going to have to find those 6-7 million forwards to have, because 8 million for Bamford seems a bit much, but his teammate Rafinha seems to be one of the bargains that we've had so far. 6.5 million for Rafinha as a midfielder is an absolute steal in my opinion. There's no way that I'll be going for Bamford at 8 million when Rafinha is in there at 6.5. Taking set pieces, he'll be even more fluid, he'll be more familiar with the league next season. He's on set pieces, he's such an attacking threat for them. 6.5 seems like an absolute bargain. So they have a tough opening start to the season, they do, but if you need a 6.5 mil, we know Rafinha can do it against pretty much whoever they play against. So defensively, I like Cooper at 4.5. I think Meslier is a bit much given Sanchez, but Rafinha at 6.5 is one of the players I was most excited to see. Next up, we have Liverpool. Trent in at 7.5, same as this season. Salah in at 12.5, same as this season. Robertson 7, same as this season, and Jota 7.5. So the top three there in Trent, Salah and Robertson are all pretty self-explanatory, to be honest. It's as we'd expect. The strong end to the season probably moved Trent up from 7 to 7.5, and I think that's fair enough. I still think at 7.5 he's a great own. Salah at 12.5 is very expected. He could have been 13, so 12.5 I think is reasonable, and they've got a really nice opening run to the season, so I reckon I'll probably own Salah and Trent. And then Robertson at 7, it gives that little bit of a differential if you don't want to go Trent. You do gain something back if you don't go Trent and you go Robertson. But Jota at 7.5, I think he has potential again to be a really nice option. We saw a bit of rotation him coming in and out of the team, but we know what he's capable of. The more time he spends in that Liverpool team, Firmino getting on a bit, not quite performing as much, Jota's going to get more and more minutes. So the one that I was excited to see here is Jota. So if we get an injury to one of the front three, if Mane, Salah, Firmino potentially is out for a few weeks, then Jota at 7.5 million is an absolutely brilliant pick. So yeah, I was happy with Jota. The rest are pretty much as we'd expected and we would have predicted. So next up, we actually have the full team list for Liverpool. So we can see Mane in there at 12. Now, that's one that I picked out that if he'd been in at 11.5, 11, then there would be a sort of chat between do you go Salah or do you go Mane, seeing how well Mane ended the season. But the 0.5 with Salah being on penalties, he is that bigger goal threat. He's more involved sort of on a consistent basis. So for me, that's a pretty easy decision. And then the other places we look are elsewhere in the defence. So Van Dijk coming in at 6.5, Konate in at 5.5, Matip 5 and Gomez 5. We'll likely have a Liverpool centre-back playing at maximum 5.5, which I think is pretty good, but we'll have to see which of them it is. With the Champions League, there may be a bit of rotation in there, but Van Dijk at 6.5, saving $1 million on Trent could definitely be an option. So given the season he's had, his price is in at 6.5, so I quite like that. The rest of the midfield, there's not that much. Thiago, now without Wijnaldum, maybe playing more regularly in at 5.5, could be an interesting one. And Henderson in at 5, we know what he can do when he starts regularly. Whilst Firmino seems to be up at 9, which is too much for him. But Jota was the real standout one for me for Liverpool, and I think at 7.5 at some point this season he could provide really good value. So next up we have Norwich. So Krul, the keeper, came in at 4.5 as expected. Pukki in at 6, which I really like. I was surprised given how good he was at times in the season they were in the Premier League, that he's not 6.5. So I think 6 is a really nice price for him. They have a difficult start to the season, so I won't own him then. But when I, potentially on an early wild card, Pukki is a really good option. Hanley in defence at 4.5, McLean in at 5. There's not that much in there. Krul at 4.5 is nice. Probably won't go for him because of the Sanchez pick or Gaeta, for example. But Pukki in at 6 is one I really like. Now, Norwich is a team, again, that we have the full price list. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these because there's not that much in here to talk about, except I'm going to butcher this name, Omer Bamidele, at 4 million in as a defender. He started, I think, every game for them in the last month and a half of the season, and he's 4.0, so we may already know our 4.0 defender for this season. He does play for Norwich, which isn't the best, although they may be a different beast to what we saw from them when they got relegated. So it's at least nice to know that there is a 4.0 defender who we think will be a starting defender if they don't go and replace him. So that's the key one to pull out here. We can see Cantwell. I'm sure a lot of you remember him from his last time in at 5.5. I think that's reasonable, but Pukki in at 6, and then that Omabad Dele in at 4.0 are the two players that I would consider owning from Norwich, although their start to the season is a bit too difficult for me. So next up was a big one in Tottenham. So Spurs, we have Lloris in at 5.5, too much given the other keepers, and Højbjerg in at 5. We were never really going to own him, but they did reveal to us the two big names in Son coming in at 10 million, which I think given the season he's had is very reasonable. If Kane stays, I still think 10 for Son is really good. I'm surprised it didn't go up more given how well he performed, particularly in the first half of the season. And Kane coming in at 12.5 is very interesting. I quite like what they've done there. I think 12 is more reasonable because only 4 for a goal, doesn't get the clean sheet points on someone like Salah, so he is having to score more goals and get more assists than Salah in order to match the points. Now, he did have a really good season last season. He may be at Manchester City or Man United, for example. We don't know if he's going to be at Spurs, which has probably come into their thinking when giving him that 12.5 price range. If he's 12.5 playing at Tottenham, it does feel like quite a lot to spend on him. Again, given that it's only 4 for the goal, it's no clean sheet point on someone like Salah. So Salah for me at the moment ranks higher in my ownership than Kane. We'll see where someone like Bruno Fernandes or some of the City guys come in. I don't think it's impossible that I own Kane. I like what they've done. It makes us think about whether he gets in our teams or not. 12.5, an interesting one. We'll see how your sort of team dynamics shape up and if there are other bargains that can allow you to afford him. But at the moment, I am yet to decide on Harry Kane. So next up, we have West Ham United. So again, some nice ones in here. So Antonio in at 7.5. I think that's reasonable. Given the other prices of 4s we've seen, given we know what Antonio can do when he starts, 7.5 is pretty as expected. I think that's quite a good price for him. Souček in at 6 million. 10 goals if he gets a season is a good return for him at 6 million. I probably won't start the season when you've got someone like Rafinha in at 6.5, but Souček at 6, if he starts getting his goals again like he did in the first half of the season, is a nice pick. And then the defenders, Cresswell at 5.5 and Soufal in at 5. The thing that's worth considering with West Ham is, do they get hindered by playing in Europe? Do these players get tired, get rotated more? But Cresswell at 5.5, I'd probably look at Soufal. He ended the season really well, getting a lot of assists. Cresswell is on set pieces, which is why he's got that 0.5 more. But if they're playing a 5 at the back with Cresswell in at centre-back, I think Soufal at 5 million is definitely the one that I saw here and thought, yeah, that's the one that I'm going to consider owning for game week 1. So some nice prices in there, but Soufal is definitely the one that I was considering the most. But West Ham, again, the final team that we've got price reveals for, we got the full price list. So there isn't that much to talk about. Masuaku, Diop in defence, not always playing, and Masuaku is injured at the moment, both at 4.5. So for the second half of the season are worth considering. There are a lot of those West Ham midfielders also got quite nice price points. So Yarmolenko is doing very well at the Euros in at 5.5. Bowen is 6.5. Benrahma and Lanzini both in at 6, and Fornal is in at 6. So although Antonio's in at 7.5, there are some good midfield options potentially as differentials to West Ham if they continue their form. Fornal's ended the season very well, so he's another one that could potentially sneak in if we need a budget pick. But again, would I go for someone like Rafinha over them? I probably would. But Soufal in there, and then potentially if there's injury, some of those backup defenders in particular are very nicely priced. So again, I think FPL have done a good job in pricing up West Ham. So those are all the teams that we've had priced so far on Sunday. So the final question we've got is, when do I think FPL is going to launch? What are we going to get in the coming days and everything like that? So my current prediction is that we've had 9 teams today, and there were meant to be 10 because they were done every 45 minutes, except there was one slot where there was an hour and a half, and it wasn't over lunch or something like that. It was at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We all thought the prize reveals had ended, but then they came back again, and we think it's Manchester United who seem to have had the bug, because it was sort of every second team got announced. So if we say 9, probably 10, I imagine we'll get, I think there's 2 scenarios that we could get. We either get 10 tomorrow and then it launches on Tuesday morning, or we get 6 tomorrow and 5 on Tuesday, and then it launches Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning. So I think by Wednesday, I'd be surprised if the game isn't out then. I may be wrong, but I think by Wednesday we will get the game. But those are the prices. There'll be more coming tomorrow. I hope you've enjoyed. Let me know in the comments which players you like, which you're considering owning already, which you think maybe a bit too much. Is Kane at 12.5 too much? Are you on Rafinha and Sanchez, Salah, Trent like I'm going to be? And that's my plan for game week 1. But hope you've enjoyed. I'm so excited to be back. As you can see here, there'll be leagues, everything, and plenty of videos to come for you all between now, the start of the season, and throughout. So if you have enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe, turn on notifications, because there'll be, as soon as that game launches, there will be a lot of videos coming your way. So yeah, hit that subscribe button if you aren't already, like the video as well, and I will see you all very soon for more prices and hopefully the official game come in the middle of next week. So cheers all, have a good week.